What if the person you underestimated turned out to be the one who could redefine your future? Carl Donovan, a smug hiring manager, thought he was in control when he dismissed Marcus Fields, a sharply dressed black man with an impressive resume, as just another unqualified applicant. But what Carl didn't know was that Marcus wasn't here to fit into Carl's narrow expectations. He was about to shatter them. The morning sun cast long shadows against the sleek glass walls of Templestone Corporation's high-rise office. Marcus Fields, a sharply dressed black man in his early 30s, adjusted his tie as he stepped into the bustling lobby. The environment radiated corporate ambition, with employees moving purposefully, briefcases in hand, and phones pressed to their ears. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and resolve. He had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, an interview for a mid-level management position in one of the industry's most reputable firms. The receptionist directed Marcus to a conference room on the 15th floor, where he was greeted by Carl Donovan, the hiring manager. Carl, a middle-aged man with neatly combed gray hair and a tailored suit, greeted him with a perfunctory handshake, his eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe with a flicker of judgment that didn't go unnoticed. "Mr. Fields," Carl said, his tone clipped, "let's get started." Marcus remained composed, his calm demeanor masking the unease building in the room. Carl gestured for Marcus to sit, then flipped open a folder containing Marcus's resume. With barely a glance, he leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together. "So, Mr. Fields, tell me why you think you'd fit in here," Carl said, his tone tinged with condescension. Marcus, unfazed, launched into his carefully prepared response. He highlighted his MBA from a top-tier university, his years of experience leading successful projects, and his proven track record in boosting profitability. Carl nodded occasionally, though his disinterest was palpable. Instead of engaging with Marcus's qualifications, Carl interjected with irrelevant questions. "Do you think you'll be able to keep up with our fast-paced environment?" he asked, his gaze lingering on Marcus's dark skin. "It's a lot of pressure, you know." Marcus felt the sting of the implied doubt, but kept his voice steady. "I thrive under pressure," he replied. Carl smirked slightly and scribbled something on a notepad. Then, as Marcus elaborated on a strategy he'd implemented in his previous role that resulted in a 20% revenue increase, Carl interrupted with a dismissive chuckle. "Interesting," Carl said, closing the folder abruptly. "Well, we'll be in touch." He stood up, signaling the end of the interview before Marcus could finish his thought. Marcus extended his hand for a polite handshake, but Carl's grip was limp and fleeting. As Marcus left the room, Carl sat back down, muttering under his breath, "Not the right fit." Unbeknownst to Carl, this interview was just the beginning of a reckoning that would challenge his biases and reshape the company's future. Marcus Fields grew up in the heart of Baltimore, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams often felt like luxuries. The streets were a mix of laughter and struggle, where children played basketball on cracked courts while their parents worked long hours to make ends meet. Marcus's parents, Evelyn and Robert, were no exception. Evelyn was a school teacher who believed in the transformative power of education, and Robert was a mechanic who taught Marcus the value of hard work and perseverance. From an early age, Marcus exhibited an insatiable curiosity. While his friends idolized athletes and entertainers, Marcus was captivated by leaders like Thurgood Marshall and Mae Jemison. His mother nurtured this interest, filling their modest home with books and encouraging Marcus to question the world around him. Despite his academic promise, Marcus faced systemic challenges that threatened to derail his potential. In high school, he excelled in math and science, earning accolades that set him apart. Yet he often found himself underestimated by teachers and peers who couldn't see beyond their biases. "Are you sure you belong in AP classes?" one teacher asked him during his sophomore year, a question that stung but fueled his determination. With the unwavering support of his parents and a handful of mentors, Marcus graduated at the top of his class and earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. There, he majored in business administration and quickly established himself as a standout student. He founded a diversity-focused entrepreneurship club, interned at top firms, and graduated magna cum laude. Marcus's professional journey was just as impressive. After earning his MBA, he joined a mid-sized tech firm, where he rose through the ranks with remarkable speed. His ability to identify inefficiencies and implement innovative solutions earned him the nickname the Fixer among colleagues. In one instance, Marcus spearheaded a project that reduced operating costs by 15% while increasing employee satisfaction, a rare feat in a competitive industry. Yet despite his accolades and growing reputation, Marcus often encountered subtle and overt discrimination. In meetings, his ideas were sometimes dismissed, only to be lauded when repeated by someone else. Networking events often felt like exercises in endurance, as he navigated microaggressions disguised as casual banter, but Marcus refused to let these experiences define him. Instead, he used them as fuel, determined to shatter stereotypes and pave the way for others. When Marcus came across the opening at Templestone Corporation, he saw it as more than just a career opportunity. He admired the company's mission statement, which emphasized innovation and inclusivity, values he held close to his heart. However, he was unaware that the culture within its walls didn't always align with its outward image. On the morning of his interview, Marcus prepared meticulously. His resume was polished, his references impeccable, and his portfolio brimming with accomplishments. He knew he was overqualified for the role, but viewed it as a stepping stone to something greater. As Marcus walked into the Templestone building, he carried not just his professional expertise, but the weight of his journey, years of overcoming obstacles, proving doubters wrong, and striving to create opportunities for others. What he didn't know was that this interview would mark the beginning of a confrontation with prejudice, one that would test his patience, his resolve, and his belief in the power of transformation. As Marcus left the interview room, Donovan leaned back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. He didn't bother hiding his disdain as he shuffled Marcus's meticulously prepared resume to the bottom of a messy pile. To Carl, Marcus wasn't a standout candidate. He was an inconvenience, a disruption to his comfortable way of doing things. Carl had been at Templestone Corporation for nearly 15 years, climbing the ranks more through connections than competence. His hiring decisions often reflected his biases, though he was careful never to be explicit. To his peers, Carl projected an air of professionalism, but within his circle of trusted colleagues, his prejudices surfaced in subtle, insidious ways. In the office break room later that day, Carl's dismissive attitude toward Marcus was on full display. "Did you see that guy?" Carl scoffed to a co-worker, flipping through a glossy report. "Dressed like he's interviewing for CEO, but no real-world experience. These people always think they can just waltz in and take over." The co-worker, a younger manager named Susan, shifted uncomfortably. "I thought he seemed really qualified," she ventured cautiously. "His resume was impressive," Carl snorted, waving her comment away. "Sure, on paper. But let's be real, he wouldn't fit in here. Our clients expect a certain image." His words were laced with enough vagueness to avoid direct accusation, but carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Susan bit her lip, her discomfort growing. This wasn't the first time she'd witnessed Carl dismiss a highly qualified candidate from an underrepresented background. There was the Latina software engineer whose credentials had been mocked for being too academic, and the Indian applicant who was brushed off as overqualified. Each time, Carl had spun the rejection as a matter of cultural fit. Carl's behavior wasn't lost on others in the office either. A junior HR assistant named Jake often overheard Carl's comments in meetings. He recalled a conversation where Carl jokingly referred to another candidate as a diversity hire waiting to happen. Though Jake found Carl's remarks troubling, he didn't feel empowered to speak up. Carl's seniority and influence created an unspoken rule: dissent wasn't welcome. Behind closed doors, Carl reveled in the power his position afforded him. To him, the interview process wasn't just about evaluating candidates, it was about maintaining control, reinforcing an environment that reflected his own narrow worldview. However, cracks in Carl's facade were beginning to show. Quiet murmurs among staff about his hiring practices were growing louder, and a few employees were documenting incidents of questionable behavior. Susan, in particular, found herself replaying Carl's comments in her mind, torn between staying silent and taking a stand. What Carl didn't realize was that his actions were laying the groundwork for his own undoing. Marcus wasn't just another candidate to be dismissed. He was someone who had faced and overcome systemic obstacles, someone who knew how to navigate adversity and turn it into opportunity. As Carl returned to his office, confident in his decision to reject Marcus, he remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within Templestone Corporation. What he had dismissed as a routine interaction was about to become the catalyst for a reckoning that would challenge his authority, his biases, and the very culture he had worked so hard to protect. 3 days after Marcus's curt dismissal, the air in Templestone Corporation buzzed with an unusual energy. Rumors of a high-level announcement had swept through the office, leaving employees curious and speculating. The weekly department meeting was suddenly expanded, with the CEO, Barbara Knight, scheduled to make an appearance. This alone was a rarity. Barbara was known for her no-nonsense approach, seldom involving herself in anything short of monumental. Carl Donovan entered the conference room with his usual smug air, chatting with his confidants about the potential purpose of the meeting. "Probably another pointless restructuring," he muttered dismissively, straightening his tie. The room gradually filled with employees, from entry-level staffers to senior managers. As the clock struck 10 a.m., Barbara entered the room, exuding authority in a tailored navy suit. She stepped to the podium with a confident stride, her presence silencing the murmurs. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her tone crisp but warm. "As many of you know, Templestone has been expanding rapidly, and with growth comes the need for strong, visionary leadership. Today, I'm thrilled to announce the appointment of our new Vice President of Strategic Operations, who will lead our efforts to drive innovation and inclusivity across all departments." The room fell silent. Employees leaned forward, eager to hear the name. Carl, however, appeared indifferent, already flipping through his phone under the table. Barbara continued, her voice brimming with excitement. "Please join me in welcoming Marcus Fields to our executive team." The name hit Carl like a thunderclap. His hand froze mid-scroll as his head jerked up in disbelief. His mind raced, replaying their brief encounter in his office. The room erupted in applause as Marcus entered with an air of calm authority. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit and flanked by 2 senior board members, he looked every bit the seasoned executive. His confident smile and composed demeanor commanded immediate respect. Carl's face drained of color as Marcus scanned the room, his eyes briefly meeting Carl's. There was no trace of malice in Marcus's expression, only a quiet, piercing awareness. Barbara extended a hand to Marcus as he reached the podium. "Marcus brings a wealth of experience and an impressive track record in transforming operations and fostering growth," she said. "We're fortunate to have him lead us into this next chapter." Marcus took the microphone, his voice steady and resonant. "Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for the warm welcome," he began. "I'm honored to join Templestone, a company with such tremendous potential. Together, I believe we can build a future defined by innovation, integrity, and inclusion." His words were met with another round of applause, but Carl sat motionless, his mind a whirlwind. How could he have missed this? The resume, the poise, the unmistakable qualifications. It was all there. Yet Carl had dismissed Marcus as though he were just another underqualified applicant. As Marcus wrapped up his brief speech, he stepped off the podium, shaking hands with department heads and exchanging warm introductions. When he reached Carl, the moment hung in the air like a charged wire. "Mr. Donovan," Marcus said with a polite smile, extending his hand. Carl hesitated, the weight of his misjudgment pressing heavily on him. "Congratulations," he muttered, forcing a weak smile as he shook Marcus's hand. "Thank you," Marcus replied, his gaze steady. "I look forward to working together." The words were professional, but the subtext was undeniable. Marcus remembered. The rest of the meeting continued with departmental updates, but Carl barely registered a word. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as the realization of his own biases and the consequences of his actions set in. When the meeting adjourned, employees clustered around Marcus, eager to introduce themselves and express their enthusiasm. Carl lingered by the doorway, watching as the very man he had dismissed as unfit was now being celebrated as a transformative leader. As Carl slipped out of the room, his confidence shattered. He couldn't shake the feeling that his world had just been irrevocably altered. The morning after his introduction, Marcus began his first official day as Vice President of Strategic Operations. He arrived at the office early, his energy focused and purposeful. Walking through the corridors, he greeted employees warmly, his presence already transforming the atmosphere. Everyone could sense that change was in the air. Carl Donovan, on the other hand, had barely slept. His thoughts had been consumed by Marcus's appointment and what it meant for his own position. He had carefully avoided Marcus during the initial introductions, but today he had no choice. The VP had scheduled a one-on-one meeting with him. At exactly 10 a.m., Carl stood outside Marcus's new office, clutching a notebook. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see Marcus sitting behind his desk, reviewing files. The office, recently vacated by Marcus's predecessor, now carried an understated elegance that mirrored Marcus's professional demeanor. Carl knocked hesitantly. "Mr. Fields?" "Come in, Mr. Donovan," Marcus said, looking up with a calm smile. Carl stepped inside, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. Marcus gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, take a seat." As Carl settled in, Marcus closed the file in front of him and leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the desk. "I wanted to meet with you early on," Marcus began, his tone measured and professional. "Your department plays a crucial role in our company's success, and I'd like to understand more about your approach and vision." Carl cleared his throat. "Of course," he said, fumbling with his notebook. I've been with the company for over a decade, and my focus has always been on maintaining high standards and ensuring that we bring in the right talent." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a faint but knowing smile playing on his lips. "The right talent. That's certainly a priority for all of us." Carl's discomfort deepened. He could feel Marcus's words carrying an unspoken weight, a subtle reminder of their previous interaction. "There's something I'd like to address," Marcus continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "When we last met, during my interview, I sensed that my qualifications weren't fully considered. I believe it's important for us to examine how we evaluate candidates to ensure we're fostering an inclusive environment." Carl stiffened. "Mr. Fields, I can assure you that my decisions are always based on professional considerations." Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "Carl, let's not dance around this. It's not just about me. I've already noticed patterns in hiring practices that suggest a bias, conscious or unconscious. This is something we need to address, not just for the good of the company, but for the integrity of our culture." Carl shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I understand. It wasn't my intention to overlook anyone. If I've made mistakes, I'm willing to reflect and improve." Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. "That's all I ask. Mistakes happen, but growth comes from accountability. Moving forward, I'll be implementing new policies to ensure that our hiring practices are equitable and transparent. I trust I can count on your support." "Of course," Carl replied quickly, eager to align himself with Marcus's leadership. The meeting ended shortly after, with Marcus standing to shake Carl's hand. "Thank you for your time, Carl. Let's work together to make Templestone a leader in more ways than one." As Carl left the office, he felt both relief and unease. Marcus had been gracious, but there was no mistaking the power shift. For the first time in his career, Carl realized that the old ways of doing things would no longer suffice. In his office, Marcus returned to his work, satisfied that the conversation had planted seeds for change. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared to lead by example, ensuring that the culture of exclusion Carl had perpetuated would be dismantled piece by piece. The ripple effects of Marcus's leadership were felt almost immediately. His initiatives, implemented with precision and a calm authority, began to challenge long-standing norms within the company. Employees found themselves navigating uncharted territory, one where accountability was no longer optional and biases were no longer ignored. Behind closed doors, the HR department was hard at work conducting an internal review of Carl's hiring practices. Marcus's concerns had prompted the board to authorize a full investigation. The results were both illuminating and troubling. Patterns of exclusion, particularly affecting candidates from marginalized backgrounds, emerged across Carl's tenure. One striking instance involved a qualified Latina applicant whose resume Carl had dismissed for being too ambitious for the role. Another showed Carl favoring candidates who shared his alma mater or personal background, often to the detriment of more experienced candidates. The findings couldn't be ignored. The board convened to discuss the appropriate steps, and by the end of the week, Carl was summoned to a disciplinary meeting. Sitting before a panel of HR representatives and senior executives, Carl's earlier bravado had crumbled. "I've always made decisions in the company's best interest," he argued, though his tone lacked conviction. One of the executives leaned forward, his expression stern. "Carl, these patterns show a clear deviation from our stated values. Whether intentional or not, your actions have created a barrier to inclusion." Carl struggled to respond, his excuses sounding increasingly hollow. The HR director spoke next, her tone measured but firm. "We're recommending immediate steps to address these issues. You'll be required to attend mandatory diversity and inclusion training, and your hiring authority will be revoked until further notice." The final blow came when Carl was informed of his demotion. No longer would he hold the title of senior manager. Instead, he was reassigned to a less influential role, with his performance closely monitored. The news spread quickly within the company, creating a buzz among employees. For some, Carl's demotion was a vindication, proof that change was possible even in entrenched systems. Others felt a mixture of relief and discomfort, realizing their complicity in a culture that had allowed Carl's behavior to persist. In the weeks that followed, Marcus introduced a series of measures to rebuild trust and ensure fairness. One of his first actions was to implement blind resume reviews for initial hiring stages, removing identifiers like names and addresses that could trigger unconscious biases. He also launched a mentorship program, pairing junior employees with senior leaders across departments. This initiative not only created pathways for career growth, but also fostered a culture of collaboration and mutual respect. Employees began to notice the changes in subtle but significant ways. Meetings became more inclusive, with Marcus ensuring that every voice was heard. Hiring panels became more diverse, reflecting the values Marcus championed. Carl's colleagues watched his adjustment with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Stripped of his authority, Carl initially struggled to adapt. The once dominant figure now found himself navigating the company's new landscape, one where his actions were scrutinized and his influence diminished. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to lead with grace and determination. He made it a point to speak with employees at every level, understanding their experiences and identifying areas for improvement. One day, during a town hall meeting, Marcus addressed the staff directly. "We're not just here to meet quarterly goals," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "We're here to build something lasting, a company that reflects the best of all of us, where talent and integrity matter more than anything else." The room erupted in applause, the employees inspired by Marcus's vision. Even those who had initially been resistant found themselves rethinking their assumptions and embracing the changes. Outside the company, news of Marcus's leadership began to gain traction. A journalist covering corporate diversity initiatives published a glowing article about the transformation at Templestone, highlighting Marcus's role in driving change. The article sparked conversations on social media, with people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination and calling for systemic reforms. The hashtag number leaders with integrity began trending, a testament to Marcus's impact. Through it all, Marcus remained focused. He knew that changing a company's culture was a marathon, not a sprint. But with every step forward, he felt a growing sense of purpose, knowing that his work was creating a foundation for a more equitable future. Marcus Fields knew his journey had just begun. As the Vice President of Strategic Operations, his leadership extended beyond his department, influencing the company's culture at every level. But Marcus wasn't content to stop there. He saw an opportunity to make a broader impact, both within the company and beyond. One of his first initiatives was to formalize a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion (DEI) program. While similar efforts had been attempted in the past, they often lacked focus and follow-through. Marcus envisioned something different, a program rooted in actionable change rather than performative gestures. He partnered with external consultants and civil rights organizations to create a curriculum tailored to Templestone's unique challenges. The program included workshops, interactive training sessions, and open forums where employees could share their experiences in a safe and supportive environment. Marcus also introduced blind resume reviews, a process that anonymized applicant details during the initial stages of hiring. By removing indicators like names, addresses, and educational institutions, he aimed to ensure that candidates were evaluated solely on their skills and qualifications. But Marcus's vision extended far beyond hiring practices. He recognized the importance of community engagement in driving meaningful change. Drawing on his connections, he collaborated with local nonprofits to launch an internship program for underrepresented youth. The initiative offered high school and college students a chance to gain real-world experience, fostering a pipeline of diverse talent for the future. At the same time, Marcus used his platform to amplify the voices of others. He became a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, sharing his story and advocating for systemic reforms. His speeches were equal parts personal and pragmatic, blending his own experiences with actionable steps companies could take to promote inclusion. "Change doesn't happen by accident," he said during one keynote address. "It requires intention, accountability, and a willingness to challenge the status quo." The response was overwhelming. Attendees flooded Marcus with messages of support and gratitude, sharing how his words had inspired them to take action in their own organizations. Within Templestone, the ripple effects of Marcus's leadership continued to grow. Employees who had once felt marginalized began to feel seen and heard. The mentorship program he had established became a cornerstone of the company's culture, pairing employees from diverse backgrounds with senior leaders who could guide and advocate for them. But Marcus's mission wasn't without its challenges. There were those who resisted the changes, viewing them as unnecessary or disruptive. Marcus faced criticism, both subtle and overt, from individuals who felt threatened by his initiatives. Rather than shy away, Marcus addressed the resistance head-on. He invited skeptics to join him in open discussions, creating a space for honest dialogue. In one memorable meeting, an older executive expressed frustration about the emphasis on DEI, claiming it detracted from the company's core mission. Marcus responded with calm determination. Our mission is to innovate and lead, he said. And leadership means recognizing that diversity isn't a distraction, it's a strength. When we build an environment where everyone can thrive, we position ourselves for long-term success. The executive didn't respond immediately, but over time, Marcus noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. It was a reminder that change, though slow, was possible. Outside the office, Marcus's efforts began to attract attention from the media. He was featured in a national business magazine, which highlighted his initiatives as a model for corporate responsibility. The article sparked widespread discussions, with readers praising Marcus's approach and calling for similar efforts in their own workplaces. Despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. For him, the work wasn't about recognition, it was about creating a legacy of inclusion and equity. One evening, as Marcus prepared for another keynote speech, he paused to reflect on his journey. From the rejection he faced during his interview to his current role as a change-maker, every step had been fueled by resilience and purpose. This isn't just about me, Marcus thought. It's about opening doors for others and ensuring that no one has to face the same barriers I did. With renewed determination, Marcus stepped onto the stage, ready to continue his mission. Carl Donovan's career had taken an unexpected turn, one that left him grappling with hard truths about himself. Demoted to a junior management role, he now faced a starkly different reality, one where his decisions were scrutinized and his authority was no longer absolute. It was a humbling experience, and though his pride initially bristled, it became a turning point in his life. Part of Carl's rehabilitation included attending the mandatory diversity and inclusion training Marcus had spearheaded. At first, he approached the sessions with skepticism, believing them to be corporate performativity. But as the sessions unfolded, something shifted. One training session focused on unconscious bias, featuring first-hand accounts from employees across the company. A young black woman shared how she had felt overlooked for promotions despite her qualifications. A Latino employee recounted subtle but painful microaggressions he had experienced in meetings. Their stories were raw, honest, and unfiltered, cutting through Carl's defensiveness. Carl found himself sitting quietly, absorbing their words. For the first time, he recognized the patterns, the same biases that had clouded his own judgment. He began to see how his actions, intentional or not, had contributed to the very culture Marcus was working to change. Determined to confront his shortcomings, Carl reached out to Marcus. The meeting was brief but profound. Carl approached Marcus's office nervously, clutching the notes he had jotted down during the training sessions. When Marcus invited him in, Carl's voice was steady but tinged with remorse. "I want to apologize," Carl began, "for how I treated you, and for all the times I've let my biases affect my decisions." "I was wrong." Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. Carl continued, his words genuine and unpracticed. "I know I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I want to do better. I need to do better." There was a moment of silence before Marcus responded. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step," he said. "But what matters now is what you do next." Carl nodded, grateful for the chance to make amends. "If you're willing, I'd like to learn from you," he said hesitantly. "I know I have a lot to unlearn." To Carl's surprise, Marcus agreed. Their relationship evolved into an unlikely mentorship, with Marcus providing guidance on leadership, empathy, and the importance of equitable practices. Carl began to implement what he learned, taking active steps to support diverse talent within his team and advocating for inclusion in meetings. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but it was genuine. Carl's colleagues noticed the change. He listened more, spoke with greater humility, and took accountability for his past missteps. Months later, during a company event, Carl stood before his peers to share his journey. "Change isn't easy," he admitted. But it's necessary. I've learned that leadership isn't just about authority, it's about responsibility, and I'm committed to being better." Carl's words were met with a standing ovation, and for the first time in his career, he felt like he was truly earning the respect of his colleagues. Months had passed since Marcus Fields took the helm as Vice President of Strategic Operations, and the company's culture had undergone a remarkable transformation. The sterile atmosphere of exclusivity and silent biases had given way to one of collaboration, respect, and diversity. The turning point had not been immediate, but came through consistent efforts led by Marcus. He had implemented blind resume reviews, partnered with community organizations to create pathways for underrepresented groups, and ensured accountability measures were in place. His leadership inspired a wave of introspection and change throughout the organization. Carl Donovan had become a surprising ally in this transformation. His redemption arc was a testament to the power of self-reflection and education. As Marcus's mentee, Carl had grown into a vocal advocate for inclusion, openly sharing his journey at corporate events. He used his mistakes as a springboard to educate others about the dangers of bias, fostering a ripple effect of awareness among his colleagues. One sunny afternoon, Marcus and Carl stood together at the company's annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit. The event featured panels, workshops, and speeches aimed at fostering an equitable corporate environment. Marcus delivered the keynote address, standing tall and confident as he addressed a packed auditorium. "Change begins with a single act of courage," Marcus said, his voice steady yet impassioned. "Whether it's standing up against bias, giving someone a chance, or reflecting on our own blind spots, every action matters. Together, we've proven that progress isn't just possible. It's inevitable when we commit to doing better." The audience erupted into applause, and as Marcus stepped off the stage, Carl approached him with a nod of appreciation. "You've built something incredible here," Carl said earnestly. "We built it," Marcus corrected with a small smile. Meanwhile, the company itself had become a beacon for inclusive practices, attracting top talent from diverse backgrounds. A recent report highlighted its strides in equity, setting a benchmark for other firms in the industry. The story came full circle when Marcus returned to the boardroom where his journey with the company began. This time, he wasn't sitting as a hopeful applicant, but as a respected leader. The room buzzed with energy as the board discussed the impact of Marcus's initiatives, each member voicing their pride in the company's direction. After the meeting, Marcus paused by the window, looking out at the bustling city below. His reflections stared back, a reminder of the resilience and determination that had brought him here. As the day wound down, Carl approached Marcus with an idea for an upcoming mentorship program, further solidifying his role as a champion for equity. Marcus nodded, pleased to see how far Carl had come. The final scene unfolded in a conference hall, where Marcus addressed an audience of aspiring leaders. "Every challenge," he said, his voice resonating with conviction, "is an opportunity to build a better future. Let's make sure we seize it." The audience rose in a standing ovation, the sound echoing with hope and determination. Marcus's journey was no longer just a story of overcoming adversity. It had become a blueprint for lasting change.